The folder on the desk between us is thinner than I expected for something this permanent. 4 pages. The notary's office on King Street East smells faintly of cedar and something herbal. A diffuser running on the sill behind her head that I keep noticing each time my thoughts drift, which is more often than I'd like this morning. My phone is face down on my knee. I placed it that way 23 minutes ago, after the 16th call from my son went unanswered. I know it's 16 because I counted, the way I used to count respirations at the bedside when I was a nurse and needed something precise to hold on to. Mrs. Pemberton, the notary, says gently, "We can take as long as you need." I look at the form, my name in the designated fields, the property address on Herkimer Street, the beneficiary line, Hamilton Community Land Trust. 40 years of a life, arranged into signature blocks and witness lines. "I'm ready," I tell her. "Let's finish it." I pick up the pen. My hand is steadier than I expect it to be. Before I reach the second page, my phone buzzes against my knee. I already know who it is. My son has been calling since early morning, ever since his wife reached me the night before and told me what she had finally pieced together. I have not spoken to him in 5 days, not since the afternoon I came home from Ms. Voltrin's office the first time, with a folder of questions I wasn't ready to ask aloud yet. "Should we stop?" the notary asks. "No," I say, "we should not." I sign the second page, then the third. On the fourth, I let myself look out the window for a moment. October in Hamilton. The escarpment is turning, all rust and amber, and a particular shade of gold my husband used to slow the car for, just to look. He said he never wanted to take it for granted. He said it every year, as though it were the first time he'd thought of it. And every year I believed him. I sign the fourth page. "There is one more thing," I tell the notary. "Before we seal the envelope, I need to make a call." She steps out and pulls the door softly behind her. I dial my son. He picks up before the first ring has finished. "Mum." His voice is ragged, as though he's been awake for days, which he probably has. "Just listen. Whatever you've signed, there may still be a window. Pellerin's people in Toronto are working on the financing, and if you just—" I look at the signed documents in front of me. At the notary's small potted fern doing its quiet work in the corner. "I have 4 words for you," I say, "and I will only say them once." Then I say them, and the sound that comes from the other end of the line is one I have never heard from my son before. It is the sound of something a person believed was solid, turning to air in their hands. 3 weeks before King Street East, before the 16th unanswered call, and the fern, and the October morning, I had driven my old Outback up the mountain to Ancaster for what my son had described as a family dinner. Nothing formal. Just us. "Bring that lemon tart you make." I made the tart. The crust cracked the first time, and I made it again. I drove up with it wrapped in a tea towel on the passenger seat, carrying the particular cautious hopefulness I have learned not to trust entirely, the kind that whispers, "Maybe tonight we will be easy with each other." My son and I have not always been easy. Since his father died 3 years ago, something has shifted between us that I have not found the right words for. He became more efficient on the phone. He began sending me links about retirement communities in Burlington, articles about the freedom of simplifying, as though grief were a renovation project with a clear scope of work. I read between the lines for a while, and then I stopped, because what I was finding there made me too sad. His wife met me at the door. She is a few years younger than my son, a project coordinator, careful in the measured way of someone managing a conversation they haven't quite started. She took the tart and said it looked beautiful. "There are actually a few people here," she said. "I hope that's all right." It was not just the three of us. There were 6 colleagues in the living room, a man my son had once introduced to me as an investor, a woman in angular clothes who spoke about square footage the way other people speak about travel. My son moved through the room with a kind of contained brightness I hadn't seen in a long time, filling glasses, laughing at the right moments. He hugged me when I arrived, said I looked well, and was pulled almost immediately toward the kitchen by someone else. I stood near the bookcase with a glass of sparkling water and listened. The investor's name was Pellerin. I remembered because it was a French name worn by someone who was not French, the kind of small, useless detail I've always noticed. He was talking to the woman about the lower city, pre-war housing stock, yield per unit, maximizing density on underused lots. I listened without appearing to, the way you learn in nursing when the information matters, before anyone realizes you're paying attention. My son found me again around 9. He steered me gently into the hallway near the coat closet, away from the voices. "Mum," he said, and lowered his voice. "There's something I've been meaning to bring up." "All right." He glanced past me, then back. "Mr. Pellerin has been looking at the Herkimer property. He thinks it has significant potential." I looked at my son. The duplex on Herkimer Street had been in our lives since 1989. My husband and I had bought it for less than it was worth because the previous owner was in a hurry, and we had spent 2 years on evenings and weekends replacing joists and repointing brickwork and installing new plumbing before the first tenant moved in. My son had grown up running those stairs. His father had taught him to caulk a window in that house. When my husband got his diagnosis, the rental income was what kept us from having to touch our savings. The duplex had been, in ways I couldn't always say plainly, a third presence in our marriage. "What kind of potential?" I asked. "He would like to discuss a conversion," my son said. "Condo units. The neighborhood has changed dramatically. That property could appraise close to $900,000 if it's developed properly. You could take your portion, pay off the reverse mortgage you don't have, stop worrying about the boiler and the flat roof." I set my water glass on the hallway table, carefully. "I'm not worried about the boiler," I said. "Your father installed that boiler." "I know, but he's been gone 3 years, and the property—" He was assembling an argument behind his eyes, one he had prepared in advance. But I stepped past him back toward the living room, and because there were guests, he let me go. I drove down the mountain at 11:30. The city below was laid out in its orange grid, and I kept both hands on the wheel and told myself to be fair. He's concerned. He wants what's best. He doesn't fully understand yet. But something cold had settled in the floor of my chest, and it did not lift when I got home. The call came the next morning before my second cup of tea. My son, brisk and cheerful, as though the hallway conversation had resolved itself overnight. "Mum, Mr. Pellerin's assessor would like to do a preliminary walkthrough of the Herkimer property. Informal, just to get a sense of what they're working with. If you could let the tenants know a morning that works." I put my mug down. "I haven't agreed to anything," I said. "This is just a look, no obligation. You'd still have full say. I'm not sending anyone through that property." A pause. Then the exhale, not unkind exactly, but carrying that particular weight, That means he thinks I am being sentimental in ways that cost money. We'll talk more, he said. I'll call you this week. He hung up. I took my tea to the window and looked at the backyard. At the cedar hedge my husband had planted in 1998, now 12 feet tall and leaning slightly south, the way it always had. I stood there for a long time. 2 days later, I drove to Herkimer to check the Evastrues. The downstairs tenants had been there for 8 years. A family, parents and a teenage son, who shoveled the driveway for the elderly couple next door every January without being asked. I have never once taken that for granted. Everything inside was fine, but walking the perimeter, I found something tucked into the latch of the side gate. A business card, clean and white. Pellerin Developments Group. A cell number. In handwriting on the back. Spoke with your son. Happy to connect at your convenience. My hand went cold around it. I understood then what I had been half knowing for several days. My son had not floated an idea at dinner. He had made plans. He had given someone access to my name and my property before a single word had passed between us. I put the card in my coat pocket and drove home. That evening I went through my husband's old filing cabinet in the spare room. The gray metal one he'd kept since before we were married, labeled in his neat block printing, the kind he used on job site drawings. I was looking for the original deed, the survey certificate, documentation I might need. I worked through hanging folders for an hour, finding old tax filings, appliance warranties, the manual for a snowblower we haven't owned in 15 years. In the back of the bottom drawer, beneath a folder marked Miscellaneous, I found an envelope I did not recognize. My name on the front in his printing, the flap unsealed, as though he'd pressed it closed lightly and then changed his mind. I sat down on the floor with it. Inside was a single sheet of graph paper. He had bought those pads by the half dozen from the supply store on Barton Street his whole adult life. The note was dated 8 months before he died, which meant he had written it in the autumn, when we still believed the prognosis left more time than it did. He wrote that he wasn't sure why he was putting it on paper instead of saying it, but that some things ought to be findable later. He wrote that Herkimer Street was not an asset, and I should resist anyone who spoke about it, using only that word. He wrote, "We built that place before we had anything else to build with. Don't let it go for someone else's reason. If it goes, let it go for yours." I held that sheet of graph paper and the house was very quiet around me. Outside, a dog barked twice and then stopped. I thought about my son, who had loved his father and learned from him, and had somehow, in the years since losing him, begun to hear the world in a different register than the one his father had spoken in. I thought about the family in the downstairs unit and the boy who would be starting university applications in the spring. I thought about what it might mean to let the house go for my own reason. The next morning I called a lawyer. Her name was Ms. Vautrine, and her office was on James Street North, up a flight of stairs above a small gallery. Younger than me by about 15 years, precise and unhurried in a way that I found immediately trustworthy. I told her everything. The dinner in Ancaster, the business card in the gate latch, Pellerin's name, my son's phrasing about my portion, as though the division had already been decided somewhere. I hadn't been invited. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she folded her hands on her desk. "If your goal is to remove this property permanently from the scope of any future pressure," she said, "the most durable path is a community land trust transfer, combined with a life estate interest. She explained it. I would transfer the property to the Hamilton Community Land Trust, an established nonprofit. They would take ownership. I would retain a life estate, meaning I kept full use and control of the building and continued to receive the rental income for the remainder of my life. After my death, the property would remain within the CLT structure and could never be sold to a developer. The tenants would be given a first right of purchase at a permanently affordable price. And in the meantime, she paused. In the meantime, it would no longer be yours to give, which means no one can pressure you about it. I looked out her window at James Street below, at the old warehouses slowly becoming studios and workshops and small restaurants, the neighborhood becoming something new without losing what it had been made of. Can it be undone once it's signed? I asked. No, she said. It's irrevocable, that's the point of it. Good, I said. That's what I need. She turned to her computer to begin pulling up the documents. Then she stopped. Her expression shifted slightly, the professional composure going careful. Were you aware that a title search was run on this property in September? A title search. She turned the screen so I could see. The request had come through a property data service. The name on the search: Pellerin Developments Group. The kind of search commissioned when you believe a sale is near enough to prepare for. The date was 4 days before the dinner in Ancaster. Before my son had said a word to me about any of it, I sat with that for a moment. Let it settle into what it was. Proceed, I said. Let's sign everything we can today. The full transfer took 2 appointments and a week of correspondence with the CLT's own solicitor. I did not tell my son what I was doing. I let his calls collect on my voicemail and listen to them in the evenings. Each one more pressured than the last, each one suggesting in some new phrasing that I was letting emotion override good sense, that his father would have recognized the opportunity for what it was. I played that one twice. I did not believe his father would have recognized this as an opportunity. I believed his father would have found the business card in the gate latch and been very, very quiet for a very long time. On the morning I went to sign the final papers, at the notary's office, my phone rang 16 times before I arrived. I counted each one. After I signed the 4th page and called my son and said the 4 words. It is in trust, he tried to argue. He said the CLT would impose conditions. He said Mr. Pellerin had secured preliminary financing through a firm in Toronto. He said the tenants would be looked after. The tenants are being offered the option to purchase their unit at 30% below current market value, I told him, because that is what the CLT agreement requires. They are being looked after better than you're suggesting. Mum, his voice came through strained and flat. You've just signed away $900,000. I've ensured that a family has housing stability, I said. And I've kept a promise I didn't know I'd made until I found your father's letter. He didn't know about the letter. I didn't explain it. I ended the call and thanked the notary and walked out into the October morning. The escarpment above the city blazed with color. I sat in my car for a few minutes before I went anywhere, breathing slowly, feeling the particular stillness of a decision that cannot be undone, and knowing without any doubt that it was correct. 3 days later, my son's wife called me, not from his phone, from her own, at 7 in the morning, which told me something important about where things stood in that house. She said she was sorry. She said she had not known about the title search in September. Had not known that my son had told Pellerin the sale was effectively settled. She found out when the financing fell apart, because the CRA had opened a compliance review into Pellerin Developments for misrepresented valuations on 3 previous builds, and suddenly there were lawyers and calls my son took in other rooms. He was supposed to receive a project management contract, she said. $140,000. We had the line of credit from the renovation, and he said this would clear it and leave us ahead. I didn't know about the house. I didn't know he'd already told them it was available. I listened to all of it. When she finished, I said, "I believe you." She was quiet for a moment. "What did you mean when you told him it was in trust?" I explained the CLT structure, the life estate, what it meant for the tenant family's future, what it meant for any pressure that might come later. She was quiet for longer. When she spoke, her voice had shifted, gone steadier. "He's very angry," she said, "but I think he'll understand one day. Maybe when we're older. Maybe when we understand what it means to want to leave something intact for whoever comes after." "I hope so," I said. "I truly do." I have not spoken to my son since the morning of the 4 words. His wife and I have spoken 3 times since. Short calls, careful, the way you walk on new ice in early December before you've learned where it holds. I don't know what that grows into yet. I'm giving it time, the way you give anything time that you want to become something. 6 months passed. Spring arrived in Hamilton the way it always does, reluctantly, and then in a rush. I began meeting regularly with the CLT's community liaison, a young woman named Ingra who had grown up in the lower city and could talk about housing policy with the intensity I once reserved for discharge planning. We were working through the timeline for the tenant family's purchase option. Their son, who is 17, told his mother he wants to study urban planning. She told me, and we both found that meaningful in the way things sometimes are, when the story curves back towards something good. I went to Herkimer in April to see about a slow drain in the upstairs unit. Technically the CLT's responsibility now, but old habits and muscle memory are slow to update their paperwork. I stood on the front porch after, looking at the street. The magnolia 2 doors down was in full bloom. My husband had wanted to plant one in our own yard years ago, and I had told him it was too ambitious for our climate, that we were too far from the lake for it to survive the cold. He agreed, and then mentioned the magnolia again every spring for 11 years. I thought about that, about how many things I had called too ambitious that had simply been patient. The letter is still on the refrigerator door, tucked behind a magnet from Peggy's Cove we bought on a trip years ago. The graph paper one in his block printing. I've read it enough times now that I could write it from memory. I leave it where it is because I am not ready to move it to the drawer where I keep the things I'm not yet ready to hold close. He was a practical man, my husband. He would not have wanted to be made into a symbol. But he believed, in the unshowy way he believed most things, that what you build with your hands carries a meaning that doesn't convert neatly into appraised value. And he believed that some choices can only be made by the person who was present when the foundation was poured. I was present. This is what I understand now, that I did not understand clearly enough before. Love that requires you to prove it by signing something over is not love. A child who frames your grief as an obstacle to good planning has confused the two, and they are not the same thing. And the legacy that actually lasts, the kind that holds its shape, is not tallied in what you leave behind. It is measured in what you refuse to let be taken apart when someone and came at it with a polished business card and a very reasonable voice. Some stories end with a door opening between people who have been closed to one another. This one ends with a gate latch, and with knowing that I was the one who decided what it kept out. That is enough. On the harder days, it is everything.